The air above the Pacific hums with invisible messages, bursts of dots and dashes flying through the ether, carrying the destinies of men who will never see each other's faces. Somewhere in that coded storm lies a single message, brief and unremarkable, that will determine whether thousands live or die. It begins, as so many great turning points do, with silence, an operator listening, a pen poised, the faint crackle of Morse code coming through his headset. It is 1942, and the Pacific is on fire. The Empire of Japan rules the seas after Pearl Harbor, its fleet feared and undefeated. Across the ocean, the United States reels from defeat, desperate to understand the next move of an enemy that seems to appear from nowhere, strike, and vanish again into the endless blue. In a dim, makeshift room at Pearl Harbor, a small team of American cryptanalysts works tirelessly among stacks of intercepted messages. They are not soldiers, at least not in the traditional sense. No uniforms, no weapons, just pencils, paper, and an obsession with patterns. Their leader, Commander Joseph Rockefort, wears a silk kimono and slippers, a habit that makes him the subject of whispers among his peers. But within his eccentricity lies brilliance. He believes that the Japanese naval code, known as JN-25, can be broken, and that doing so is the key to turning the tide of the war. To the uninitiated, it seems impossible. JN-25 isn't just one cipher, it's a labyrinth of layered encryptions, using thousands of code groups, additives, and daily updates. Even a single word requires hours of analysis. While America's cryptographers battle exhaustion and doubt, the Japanese Navy operates with supreme confidence. Their signals officers trust in the perfection of their system. For years, their codes have shielded operations from foreign eyes, allowing their fleets to coordinate strikes across the vast Pacific. They believe mathematics and secrecy are on their side, that no foreigner can possibly unravel their methods. To them, this code is more than communication. It is armor, an invisible wall between their empire and annihilation. Yet, as history would soon show, armor forged by human hands can always be pierced by another human mind. The story of this secret code is not just one of machines and messages. It is the story of intellect versus arrogance, of logic fighting despair. To understand its impact, one must first understand how cryptography itself became a battlefield. From the ancient scrolls of Greece and Rome, where generals used simple substitution ciphers, to the Renaissance courts of Europe, where spies and diplomats traded secrets in code, humanity has always sought to hide truth behind symbols. By the 20th century, that art had become a science. Typewriters, telegraphs, and radio waves transformed how nations spoke and how they spied. Messages could cross oceans in seconds, but that speed demanded secrecy. A single intercepted signal could mean disaster. During the First World War, codes decided entire campaigns. The Zimmermann telegram, an encrypted German proposal to Mexico, was intercepted and decrypted by British intelligence, drawing the United States into the conflict. Every military strategist in the world took note. By 1939, as the next global war began, nations poured resources into code-making and code-breaking as fervently as they did into tanks or airplanes. Battles were no longer fought only with bullets. They were fought with symbols, frequencies, and mathematical insight. In this new kind of warfare, victory did not always belong to the strongest navy or the bravest soldiers. It belonged to those who could think faster. The codebreakers of Pearl Harbor knew this. Every night, as bombers droned across the Pacific and ships burned, they sat hunched over their papers, trying to make sense of fragments, numbers that repeated, patterns that shifted, anomalies that might mean everything or nothing. They didn't know which message would matter most. They couldn't see the faces of the men whose fates hung in balance. But they worked with a single truth in mind. If they failed, others would die. And so, beneath the noise of war, another conflict raged in secret. The hum of machines replaced the roar of engines. Intelligence officers listened to the airwaves the way soldiers watched the horizon. Every coded burst was a bullet, every breakthrough a victory. None of these men would appear in the newsreels. Their triumphs would remain hidden for decades. But they were fighting, in their own quiet way, for the same thing as the pilots and the Marines: survival. By early 1942, after months of defeats and retreats, the United States had one chance to change its fortune. Somewhere out there, beyond the endless ocean, the Japanese were planning another major operation. No scout plane could find it. No spy could warn them in time. Only the code could tell them what was coming. If Rockefeller's team could break the messages before the attack began, they might save thousands. If not, the Pacific would burn again, and the hope of victory might vanish with it. The airwaves were thick with coded traffic, each message a mystery. The cryptographers leaned closer, tired eyes fixed on their notes. And then, in the midst of all the static, one fragment emerged, a series of letters and numbers that seemed familiar, almost taunting. The message was meaningless to most, but to these men, it was a riddle, a challenge. Somewhere within those symbols lay a clue, a whisper before the storm, that would change the course of the war and decide the fate of 1,000 lives. Far from the marble splendor of Rome, another empire trembled beneath the same shadow of fear. In the rugged hills and sun-scorched deserts of Judea, the iron grip of Roman rule had crushed a proud people into silence, until silence itself became unbearable. The air was thick with resentment, taxes bled the poor dry, and Roman soldiers patrolled the streets of Jerusalem with the arrogance of conquerors. Yet in the markets, in the temples, and in the narrow stone alleys, a different kind of resistance began to whisper. Men who had lost brothers to crucifixion, mothers to famine, and faith to despair started to carry a new kind of weapon. The sikha, a short, curved dagger designed for one purpose, to kill swiftly and disappear. They called themselves the Sicarii, the dagger men. To the Romans, they were terrors. To their followers, they were avengers sent by God. Their rise was not born from greed but from humiliation. Decades of Roman domination had corrupted the priesthood, desecrated the temple, and turned faith into business. Collaborators grew rich under Roman favor, while farmers starved. Every execution, every whipping in the public square, every sneer from a centurion added fuel to the fire. The Sicarii emerged as the spark meant to ignite it. They hid in plain sight. Dressed like ordinary pilgrims, they moved among the crowds during festivals, when Jerusalem overflowed with worshippers. At the height of the Passover, when songs of freedom filled the air, a Sicarius would step close to a Roman sympathizer, press his shoulder as though greeting a friend, and drive the dagger upward beneath the ribs. The victim would gasp, slump, and vanish into the chaos. By the time the crowd realized what had happened, the killer had melted away. The act was not merely murder. It was theater, a message carved in blood. Rome might control the land, but it could not control the soul. Their methods were terrifyingly effective. A single killing in a marketplace could send waves of panic through the entire city. Merchants closed their stalls, Roman patrols doubled, and suspected collaborators fled to fortified compounds. Fear became the Sicarii's true weapon. They did not seek open battle. They waged psychological war, making every Roman official wonder who among the faithful might carry a blade beneath his robe. And when panic spread, the Sicarii celebrated, for each tremor of fear weakened the illusion of Roman invincibility. The Brotherhood was not a vast army but a web of small cells, bound by faith, family, and secrecy. Fathers taught sons how to blend into crowds, how to strike without hesitation, how to die rather than betray. Their devotion was fanatical but sincere. They believed they were fulfilling prophecy, purifying Israel through blood. Yet this purity demanded sacrifice. Many Sicarii killed friends who collaborated with Rome. Some turned on other Jewish groups they considered too moderate. Their fight was not only against the empire but against compromise itself. In their eyes, half loyalty was treason. Roman authorities responded with predictable brutality. Entire villages suspected of sheltering daggermen were burned. Captured rebels were nailed to crosses lining the roads to Jerusalem. The Romans, masters of terror themselves, understood the power of spectacle, but in doing so, they deepened the very hatred they sought to extinguish. Each crucifixion created more recruits. Each crackdown confirmed the Sicarii's message that coexistence with Rome was impossible. The historian Josephus, himself a survivor of these years, described the Sicarii with both fear and contempt. He called them brigands, accused them of plunging the nation into ruin. But between his lines lies something more complex, a grudging recognition of their discipline and their courage. Unlike the thieves and bandits who preyed on travelers, the Sicarii fought with a purpose. They were born not from greed, but from despair twisted into faith. Their daggers were the last argument of a people who felt abandoned by heaven and by their own leaders. As the movement spread, it began to divide. Some of the Sicarii dreamed of a free Judea governed by divine law, others sought only vengeance. Their sanctuaries in the desert hills became places of training and indoctrination. Scouts learned the terrain like a second skin, memorizing escape routes through ravines and caves. Their leaders preached purity and sacrifice, urging them to cleanse the land of impurity, even if it meant turning the blade on their own kin. It was zeal sharpened to the point of madness. To the Romans, they were a nuisance at first, a handful of fanatics striking from the shadows. But by the middle of the 1st century, their actions had begun to shake the entire province. Governors sent desperate reports to Rome of uprisings, assassinations, and rumors of organized rebellion. The Sicarii were no longer ghosts, they had become the pulse of a coming storm. And yet, behind their violence, there remained something tragically human. Many were farmers turned killers, young men who had once tended olive groves now stalking Roman officers through Jerusalem streets. They believed they were saving their people, even as their actions invited ruin. Each killing drew Rome's wrath closer, each victory carried the seed of destruction. In the heart of the ancient city, amid prayers and torches, the dagger men prepared for the inevitable reckoning. They had turned fear into faith and blood into language. Their message was simple and terrible: freedom or death. And as the Roman Empire tightened its grip, the Sicarii sharpened their blades, ready to carve their defiance into the heart of the empire itself. The tension inside Station Hypo was reaching a breaking point. The room was a furnace of cigarette smoke and fatigue, littered with endless pages of intercepted code groups. Joseph Rochefort, still in his worn bathrobe and slippers, leaned over the latest decrypts with a mixture of exhaustion and obsession. Weeks of relentless decoding had produced fragments of Japanese messages, half-clues, stray phrases, but nothing conclusive. One word, however, appeared repeatedly: AF. The Japanese were planning an operation centered on a target they referred to as AF, but its identity remained the key to everything. If Rochefort could identify what AF meant, the U.S. Navy could predict Japan's next strike. Opinions were divided. Washington believed AF referred to some base in the South Pacific, maybe even Port Moresby. Rochefort disagreed. His instinct, supported by scattered evidence, told him it was Midway, a small atoll northwest of Hawaii, strategically vital but easily overlooked. If he was wrong, American forces could be drawn into a deadly trap. But if he was right, they could ambush the Japanese fleet and change the course of the war. The stakes were nothing less than the future of the Pacific. To prove his theory, Rochefort devised a daring ruse. He asked the Midway base to send an unencrypted message reporting that its water filtration system had failed. Within 24 hours, Japanese intelligence transmitted an encrypted dispatch stating that AF is short of water. The trap had worked perfectly. AF was Midway. Rochefort's gamble had paid off. When the decoded message reached Admiral Nimitz, the realization hit him with full force. The Japanese weren't planning to invade Hawaii, they were coming for Midway. And now, thanks to Station Hypo, Nimitz would know the exact date, direction, and composition of the enemy fleet. It was a staggering advantage, one that could only be described as miraculous in wartime. But despite the breakthrough, doubt lingered in Washington. Some officers dismissed the message as coincidence, others believed the Japanese were feeding false intelligence. Rochefort and his men fought not only against enemy ciphers but against skepticism within their own chain of command. They had seen patterns that others could not, and they were staking everything on those patterns being right. In Pearl Harbor, Admiral Nimitz made his decision. He trusted Rochefort. With the full weight of the U.S. Pacific Fleet under his command, he began positioning his carriers north of Midway, directly in the path of the oncoming Japanese armada. It was a monumental gamble. If Rockefeller's intelligence was wrong, Nimitz would be leading his fleet into disaster. If it was right, he would have the element of surprise for the first time since the war began. As the date approached, the atmosphere inside station HYPO grew electric. Every operator and linguist knew what was coming. They tracked every transmission, every shift in Japanese radio silence. The enemy's movements confirmed their predictions one by one. The Japanese fleet was moving exactly as Rockefeller had said it would. The code had spoken, and America was ready. For the men of HYPO, there was no time to celebrate. They had crossed from analysis into destiny. The messages they intercepted were now shaping the fate of ships and men thousands of miles away. Every number they typed, every phrase they translated, could decide who lived or died. In those final days before the battle, Rockefeller allowed himself one quiet moment of reflection. He had never fired a shot, never stood on a deck under fire, but he understood now that his war was no less real. The code he had broken was a weapon as deadly as any bomb. And soon, the world would see its power. The morning of June 4, 1942, dawned over the Pacific with a deceptive calm. The carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu advanced toward Midway, confident they would strike first. But Admiral Nimitz already knew their plan, every detail decoded by station HYPO. At 4:30 a.m., Japanese aircraft roared into the sky, unaware that American forces were lying in wait. At Midway, American pilots scrambled, under-equipped but determined. The Japanese attack crippled parts of the island, but the real trap was still unfolding. From hundreds of miles away, carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown prepared for a counterstrike. Confusion filled the Japanese decks as they rearmed planes with torpedoes, unaware of the danger closing in. By mid-morning, American dive bombers pierced the clouds. For just 5 critical minutes, they found the Japanese carriers exposed, decks cluttered with fuel hoses and armed aircraft. Bombs fell with terrifying precision. In moments, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu erupted in flames. The inferno consumed men and machines alike. The pride of the Imperial Navy was dying in front of their eyes. Only Hiryu struck back, damaging the Yorktown, but by afternoon she too was ablaze. For Japanese carriers sank beneath the Pacific, and with them, Japan's dream of naval dominance. On the American side, joy mixed with disbelief. Many pilots never returned, some vanished without a trace. But the tide of war had turned. What began as a desperate gamble ended as a decisive victory. Midway was not merely a triumph of courage, it was a triumph of intellect. A single code, cracked weeks before, had rewritten history. And in a quiet office in Pearl Harbor, the men of Station HYPO watched their victory unfold, not with cheers, but with silent, exhausted relief. In the aftermath of Midway, the Pacific fell eerily silent. The waves carried wreckage and memory, oil, steel, and the echoes of lost voices. For the men of Station HYPO, victory arrived as a brief telegram, enemy carriers destroyed. No medals, no announcements, only the knowledge that their secret work had saved thousands. Commander Joseph Rockefeller and his team were exhausted but proud. They had cracked Japan's unbreakable code, predicting an enemy's move with nothing but logic and nerve. But politics soon clouded their achievement. Washington's senior officers, uneasy with Rockefeller's unconventional methods, quietly stripped him of credit. Reports celebrating the Midway intelligence breakthrough never mentioned his name. Within weeks, Rockefeller was reassigned to command a floating dry dock, a humiliating demotion. He accepted it silently, telling a colleague, "If my superiors can sleep at night, so can I." Those who served with him knew the truth. He had changed the war. Across the sea, Japan reeled from the loss. Yamamoto's empire had been shattered, its best pilots and carriers gone. Yet Tokyo refused to believe their codes had been broken. Pride blinded them. They made small changes to Jane 25, unaware that the Americans could still read their messages. The seeds of future defeats were already sown. At Station HYPO, life continued in secrecy. The team kept decoding, their victories hidden behind classified walls. They had fought a war without glory, but their impact echoed louder than any explosion. They had proven that knowledge could alter destiny. Rockefeller would never see recognition in his lifetime, but decades later, his name resurfaced, a quiet vindication for a man who waged war with intellect, not weapons. In the years after the war, the story of Midway became legend, a saga of bravery, aircraft, and fire. But behind every celebrated pilot and burning carrier stood the unseen heroes who had made victory possible, the cryptanalysts. Their weapons were pencils and patience, their battlefield a room filled with static and whispers. Midway marked the birth of a new kind of warfare, one where information ruled the outcome. The lessons of Station HYPO shaped future intelligence agencies, from the Cold War's secret rooms to today's digital battlefields. Wars would no longer be won solely by force, but by those who understood before others acted. Yet the human story endures. The codebreakers were scholars, linguists, and thinkers, many far from home, driven by the quiet conviction that knowledge could save lives. They worked knowing their triumphs would remain secret, their names unspoken. Still, they persisted. Their dedication became the foundation of modern intelligence, proving that courage isn't only found in combat, it lives in clarity and perseverance. Rockefeller's recognition came long after his death, when the U.S. Navy finally honored him for his decisive role. It was a small gesture, but it restored a missing truth. History, though slow, had remembered. Today, every intercepted signal and encrypted message carries echoes of their legacy. The tools have changed, but the essence remains. Knowledge is the battlefield, and understanding is victory. The code that decided 1,000 lives reminds us that wars are not always won by strength, but by those who listen, think, and see what others cannot. In silence, the unseen still fight their wars.